So my name is Hallie Shade, and I'll tell you a little bit more about me once we get going because it will help you to understand how I came up with and developed this model. So I'm going to let my co-presenter introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her.
Good morning, you guys. Congratulations to all of you for making it here at 9 o'clock in the morning. I hope the coffee is strong this morning. My name is Danielle Crandall, and I'm a licensed professional counseling intern, which means I've finished all of my education coursework, but because I'm newer in the field, I have somebody who's supervising me. We're both counselors here in the state of Texas, and I work at Dr. Shade's private practice with her as a counselor. And so we'll tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we do it.
Okay, so first off, our PowerPoint did not make it onto the flash drive. So if you want copies of the slides after the presentation, I have business cards up here. If you come and take one and send me an email, I will send you a copy of the PowerPoint. Second, just kind of wanted to see who's here. So how many mental health professionals do we have in the room? Oh, wow. That's the most I've ever seen in a room at a PATH conference, so that's great. What about equine specialists? Okay, a lot more. That makes sense. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and a little bit about how I came to develop this model. So my first fascination with horses was when I was about 2 years old. I did not come up from a horse family. I grew up in the suburbs outside Chicago, so some horses, but not a whole lot. And I was the only kid in my play group that was willing to go on the pony ride, because in order to go on the pony ride, they were attached to a hot walker, and your parent wasn't allowed to walk with you. So after that, all I wanted was horses and ponies. So when I was 5, my parents put me in riding lessons, which they probably think was one of the best decisions and worst decisions they ever made in their life. So much so my younger sister was not allowed to ride. Luckily, she wasn't that interested in it because they could only deal with one of us having a horse obsession. When I was about 9, a horse named Cowman, you can see him, he's the paint horse there, came to the barn. And he had been Western trained. He didn't really fit in the English hunter-jumper barn that I was at. Low man on the totem pole with the other horses, had an attitude with people, but I fell in love with him. All I wanted to do was spend time with him, pet him, hang out in his stall, ride him. And so my dad tells stories, I don't remember this, but he tells stories of me trying to leave Cowman's stall and Cowman grabbing my shirt with his teeth and pulling me back in. So at that time, Cowman, the relationship we had felt magic to me as a 9 or a 10-year-old. And I was just fascinated that I could have this relationship with this other being, this species that didn't talk in words the way that I did. So I wanted to understand it and know more. So I went to college. I went to the University of Miami, and I decided I was going to study animal behavior. And so I went there. I got a double major in psychology and biology and thought that, okay, I'm going to go onward and study animal behavior. I actually looked into studying great apes, gorillas, and chimpanzees and that sort of thing, but found my way back to horses. And while I was at college, one of the most meaningful experiences for me was I trained rescue horses for the local SPCA. And that relationship with those horses, for any of you that have worked with horses like that, there's a difference, especially once you work with them and you start to really feel that connection when they start to trust you. So then I decided, okay, let's forget the chimpanzees and the gorillas. I want to come back to horses. So I moved to Atlanta, and I became a PATH International Certified Therapeutic Riding Instructor while I was doing my master's in counseling. But I wasn't quite finished yet. I felt like I still had a lot more to learn. So I decided to move to Texas, and I did my doctorate degree at the University of North Texas with Dr. Cynthia Chandler. She's one of the experts in animal-assisted therapy in the country. And so that's when I started to kind of rediscover the magic about horses again. Just through some of the courses I was taking, it was opening my mind to things that happen in relationships with people, but being able to generalize those things to relationships with animals as well. I was able to start working at an agency that did EFP, and eventually now have my own private practice doing EFP, which we're in the process of broadening and expanding into a nonprofit as well. Okay, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came up with the name. And part of the reason that I like to explain it to people is the term relational can get confused. And a lot of people tend to see it a little bit more narrowly than we see it. And part of what helped me to figure out I needed to do a better job explaining why we call it this was I was on a phone call with another mental health professional. And she just said, I think it's really great that you do that and that works for you, but I just don't think it's good to impose relationships on people, meaning relationships with the horses. And, maybe they don't want to hug the horse. Maybe they don't, they don't want this fuzzy relationship. And that's when I realized I needed to better explain what I meant by that. Because for us, as you can see on here, we define relationship pretty broadly. It's any interaction that happens between a person or another person or an animal. It doesn't just have to be warm and fuzzy, hugging, that sort of thing. And if you think about it, really any interaction we have with a person, whether it's a short interaction or a long one, in that moment we're in a relationship of some sort with that person, whether that is our spouse, our child, our teacher, our boss, the cashier at the grocery store, even the person you're on the phone with for tech support who's in another country. In that moment, you're relating to each other in some way. We use the term partnered to convey that collaborative relationship between the treatment team and between the horse, where we want this to be a positive working relationship, where each part is equally necessary, but they have their own separate roles that are equally important as well. So it's really important to us to respect the horse's sentience, that the horse can be active and self-directed in responding to the client from that relational context. And that the horse is never to be an object that's just to be moved. It's never, move this horse to point A and point B because, hypothetically we could do that with cars. We could do that with, I'm sure, the AI horses and other beings that will come out in the next 100 years, who knows what. So this is different. We want that horse to have a say in the session, to be an active participant in that relationship. So what are some of the benefits of partnering with horses in REPC? Well, what we've seen is it really increases clients' motivation to attend. We work primarily with military veterans and their children and spouses and at-risk youth. And some of the at-risk youth we work with tend to have pretty significant mental health concerns. Most of them have had a history of being hospitalized. A lot of them have had suicidal ideation, history of being hospitalized for suicide, self-harm, aggression, destruction of property, harm towards people. And as for both of those groups, the veterans and the at-risk youth, it can be tough to get them willing to go to therapy. That's not a group that is particularly always open to that process. So we've seen that by using our model in this way, they're not actually coming to see us, they're coming to see the horse. But either way, it gets them there, it gets them in the door. It involves all aspects of the person for change. When you sit in a therapist's office and you can talk about your thoughts, you can talk about your feelings. Depending on what type of therapy you're doing, they may acknowledge your sensory experiences, what you're feeling physically in your body. But for a horse, they're going to notice all of that, and they're not going to separate out the thoughts from what they're noticing about your heart rate or your breathing rate. And so it involves the whole person for change. It offers a non-threatening, low-stigma environment. When you're outside in a pasture, it feels, for a lot of our clients, a lot more comfortable than being in a closed office. And the idea of walking into a therapist's office as opposed to walking in a pasture doesn't feel as overwhelming or intimidating. Or even to be able to say, I'm going to see my therapist as opposed to I'm going to see my horse. Breaks down defense barriers. Just the presence of the horse being there can put people in a more relaxed state, more at ease. And if you're more relaxed and at ease, you're going to be better able to participate in the therapy, and you're going to be able to get further with it. It facilitates trust between the client and the therapist and also the equine specialist. Having the horse there kind of levels the playing field in a way. The horse doesn't differentiate between, well, you're the client, so I'm going to act this way towards you, and you're the therapist, so I'm going to act this way towards you. They might be reading differences in our body language based on our comfort level of being around horses. But ultimately, the horse doesn't differentiate between, well, you're the one that needs to be helped and you're the one that's doing the helping, so to speak. And so that can build in some trust for the client. But also the horse's interactions with the treatment team give the client a lot of information about who those people are and whether or not they can be trusted. And so for a lot of our teens, if the horse thinks we're okay, then it gives them a little bit more confidence in thinking maybe they could be okay with us. And then finally, having that empowerment by working with large animals. You can work with other animals, dogs and cats, and there are a myriad of therapeutic benefits for working with those animals as well, but it's a little different with a horse. A horse is so big, and especially for our clients that are not used to being around horses, that can be a pivotal point of progress for them to be able to interact with an animal this large that doesn't want to eat them, doesn't want to hurt them. So some of the key outcomes, these are some of the things that, and I'm just going to go through this slide pretty quickly, but these are some of the things that we've seen that we notice takes place through this model. Clients have increased empathy, increased patience, self-awareness, confidence, self-efficacy, social skills, assertiveness, work ethic, decision-making, personal responsibility, decreased hopelessness, anxiety, sadness, isolation, anger, self-harm. We've used this model with a variety of mental health concerns. I said military veterans, PTSD, trauma, child abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, other disruptive disorders, attention-related, communication disorders, and more high-functioning autism and PDD. So basically, these are people who are verbal and who are able, if they'd be able to participate in regular talk therapy, then this would be a model that they could participate in as well. So what are some of the key attributes of this model? It's integrative. So that means we don't have just one approach and this is it and this is all we do. We try to take what works from different approaches. We like to call our model evidence-informed because although we're not evidence-based, the model's too new, and without getting into a long spiel about how to become evidence-based, in the short part, you need to do a certain amount of research by a certain amount of people that shows the same things. We haven't had enough time to do that yet to become evidence-based. But we've taken pieces of evidence-based models to bring into this model. It's trans-theoretical. Part of the reason I developed this model, and I'd done some training in some other psychotherapy models as well, was they seemed like they were very good for one counseling theory, but maybe not as good for another one. So, you've got a variety of different psychotherapy theories from person-centered or client-centered, Adlerian, cognitive behavioral. I was looking for something that I could create that clinician of any theory would be able to use and tailor to their specific way of practicing. And it's developmental in the sense that each session builds off the session before. So who are the facilitators? As a psychotherapy model, it does need to be facilitated by a mental health professional. PATH, in their standards, lists the criteria for what somebody needs to have in order to be considered a mental health professional. The equine specialist, going through, if you haven't already, the PATH International ESMHL workshop. The competencies. So for the mental health professional, we want to make sure that somebody is already competent or has plans in place to make sure that they are becoming competent in using this model with whoever they would like to. So let's say you're a mental health professional that's never worked with veterans, but a barn approaches you and wants to start a psychotherapy program for veterans and you want to use this model. At least in the state of Texas, you would need to either show that you were competent or be working towards becoming competent to work with that population. And so what that might look like is you've either had or are in the process of concurrently having past training and education and supervised experience in order to work with the population that you haven't worked with before. We also think it's a bonus to have had experience in group work. Even if you're doing individual sessions between the client, the horse, the equine specialist, and the counselor, it starts to function like a group, especially between the client and the horse or if you've got multiple horses in the session. So having had group experience can be really helpful. For the equine specialist, definitely having groundwork. The majority of what we do takes place on the ground. So being comfortable reading horse behavior, understanding what the horses are indicating about stress levels, how the horses are communicating with each other, that sort of thing. And comfortable interacting with multiple horses in a herd at once. And so being able to recognize, okay, the herd is good right now, everybody's comfortable, oh, that horse just tensed their muscle, which means now something else might be about to happen, so I need to manage this herd. Treatment team roles. So the mental health professional responsible for any type of client-related paperwork, whether that's the intake paperwork, the ongoing progress notes, the treatment planning. So collaborating with the client to come up with the goals and objectives and how they're going to work to meet those goals and objectives. We like to include our equine specialist in that process because we feel the more that they are aware of what's going on with the client, the better they are to do their job. Directing the treatment during sessions. So what this means is that the mental health professional in this form of psychotherapy is responsible for conducting the actual psychotherapy. So they'd be the ones that would be responsible for challenging the client, confronting the client, processing any type of trauma, that sort of thing. Maintaining client emotional and physical safety, so making sure that the client is safe, and the equine specialist also helps with the physical safety part. But for some of the kids that we work with, knowing how to set physical safety limits to make sure that the child doesn't get hurt when interacting with the horse. And then initiating and running the consultation, and we call it supervision, with the equine specialist. So being able to check in after the session, see how the equine specialist is responding to it, what came up in the session that they need to discuss as a team. So for the equine specialist, physical and emotional safety for the client and the horses, evaluating the working area, so looking through wherever you're going to be working in advance, are there any hazards you need to take care of or be watchful of? This came up yesterday in our military presentation. If your neighbor is, well, at least where we are in Texas, if your neighbor's decided to go out and shoot, being aware of that and, deciding, do I need to make any changes, or do we just need to let the client know this is happening? Monitoring the stress levels of the horses, and this is really, really important, because even if the horses aren't being ridden, they can still be under a lot of stress in these sessions, even if the client doesn't even have a halter on them. For that horse, and some of our horses, when it gets too much, choose to leave, but some of them choose to stay. But being able to watch them and monitor how they're responding to the client. And even if it's a really tough session or a really emotionally draining session, being able to take that time with that horse afterward, maybe doing some grooming, some petting, something to help that horse relax and decompress after the session. Welfare, husbandry for the horses, and helping come up with, depending what your sessions are going to look like, if there's a certain type of treatment goal you're looking to meet, a certain thing you're wanting the client to get out of interacting with that horse, helping come up with, okay, well, here's what here's the objective we're trying to accomplish. Here's some ideas on what we can do with the horse to meet that objective. So some of the philosophical domains, these are some of the things that came in that influenced how developed the model. So the first is the relational domain, which we touched on a little bit, but this comes from a place of just understanding how important relationships are in general for people and for horses. Evolutionarily, horses survive because they have relationships with other horses. The other horses are there in the herd to look out for them, to make sure nothing's going to eat them. The more eyes you have, the more opportunity for somebody to notice a potential threat. People have had similar ways of evolving. As we've gotten more technical as a society, we've started to disconnect more and more from each other, and we're starting to see more and more the effects of that. There have been studies done on loneliness and isolation, and there are just a myriad of physical health conditions, increased rates of cancer, heart attack, stroke, that come from being disconnected. And that doesn't even mean you're physically disconnected. That can mean you could be in a room full of people, but if you don't feel a sense of connection with any one of those people, then you're going to feel alone and feel lonely. They've actually seen brain differences in the brains of people who feel lonely than people who don't. And once that effect has started to happen, it can make it even harder to connect with people should the opportunity present itself, because the brain has altered the way it started to function. So we incorporate the horses, as I said, into the therapeutic relationship. And so for those of you that have gone through the ESMHL workshop, that diamond model is a really good way to conceptualize and understand that. Because it is the client's relationship with the horse and the treatment team, but it's also the horse's relationship with the equine specialist and with the therapist. And so all of them influence each other. And for our clients, we tend to encourage our clients to choose their horse in their first or second session. We find that it's very interesting the way clients go about choosing a horse. And most of the clients do stay with their chosen horse through subsequent sessions, but some of them will ultimately decide that they chose the horse perhaps not for the right reasons. So we have this beautiful Palomino Halflinger that gets chosen a lot by the teenage girls. But she's pretty aloof and disinterested. So for a lot of these girls, there'll come a point where they have to decide, Do I want to keep relating and having a relationship with this horse when she's not really giving me what I want? Or do I want to look for a relationship with a horse that can meet that need that I have better? Provides opportunities for clients to really explore those relational patterns. The way we interact with the horses can say a lot about how we feel about ourselves, but also how we feel about interacting with others. I think I said my sister's been around horses, but wasn't really allowed to ride or become a horse person. She came out to the barn a couple years ago, and we were going to go for a ride, and I gave her the halter, and I said, okay, well, why don't you go put it on this horse and bring him in? And she, just seeing the way she interacted with this horse, I was like, wow, I just learned a lot about you just by the way I'm seeing you interact with this horse. And so that sort of idea that just the way they interact, even the way the horse responds to them, can reveal a lot about what's going on for them. And that way it becomes a microcosm of their relationships with other people. So to kind of illustrate that a little bit, none of the photos are of real clients for confidentiality purposes, but Maverick, his client was a military veteran, special forces, PTSD, had gotten a civilian job, but was having a really, really tough time maintaining the civilian job and getting along with people, and just felt really overwhelmed and really disconnected. He connected with Maverick, and it was fascinating to see that relationship evolve, because for him, he hadn't felt like people were safe enough to trust. The job that he'd had in the military had really made him question a lot of things about people, about the world, and he felt very guarded. And because of who he was as a person and who he'd been before he went in, that was a huge conflict for him, to be struggling to balance those two. But by interacting with Maverick, by the two of them working together, he was actually in tears by the fourth session just because it felt like such a relief to let his guard down and to connect with somebody. Experiential domain. That part talks about how just the experience of doing things in the world, whether that's interacting with somebody, whether that's doing tasks, changes us. Everything that we do is an experience, and we incorporate that into our way of being. More often than not, it doesn't necessarily change anything. If it's going to change something, that takes time and in a lot of cases therapy. But it focuses on increasing our awareness, processing our experiences, and then being able to talk about what those experiences mean and to create meaning from those experiences. So it could even be coming up with metaphors or symbols. So for some of our clients, they will look at the horses and they'll notice, okay, this horse communicates assertively. This horse communicates passively. That horse is aggressive. And so the assertive horse might become a symbol for them of how they want to be. They want to be more like that horse. And in a way, the therapeutic relationship in general is an experiential vehicle. For a lot of people, the therapeutic relationship is different and should be different, but just the experience of being in a relationship like that can be life-changing. So Snowball was one of the teenagers that we worked with, very aggressive towards other students. He was a bully, but he also got bullied a lot at school, was always in the principal's office getting suspended pretty regularly. But he just didn't get why the other kids didn't like him. And he didn't understand what he was doing that would make them so mad. He was legitimately bewildered by all this. And he started working with Snowball. And Snowball was fairly tolerant. Therapy horses, we choose them for a reason. But through the process of working with Snowball, he would notice there would be things he would do that Snowball would react to. Like one day, and I didn't even know he was going to do this before he did it. He asked me to hold Snowball and said, okay. And he went through the bushes and popped out. So I was like, what was that? He's like, well, I don't understand why that scared him. Well, let's talk a little bit about what the world's like for Snowball. Was Snowball able to understand that you were about to do that before you did it? And so through the process of him having sessions like that, and even through him watching the other horses, Snowball was kind of mid to low level on the totem pole in the herd. He was able to start making sense of the fact that other people have different experiences than I do, and other people have their own motivations based on what their world is like. And through that process, he was able to start to use his experiences with Snowball to change his way of interacting in the world. The physiological domain. This part refers to, we also incorporate, it's becoming more and more popular, luckily, it's a good thing, interpersonal neurobiology. We incorporate interpersonal neurobiology into our model as well. That's our brain's way, or the brain-based way of trying to understand the way we interact with people, the way we relate to people, and we want to incorporate how we interact with the horses into this model as well. So some of the things that we know based on research is that just petting an animal can decrease someone's stress hormones like cortisol and increase their social connection hormones like oxytocin. And so if you're feeling less stressed and you're feeling more relaxed, you're going to be more open in therapy, and you're just going to feel like you're in a better place in general. There's other research out there showing that contact with an animal can decrease blood pressure, decrease heart rate, make you feel more relaxed overall. And so we'll do certain types of activities with our horses based on this information, breathing activities, mindfulness-based activities. And what we're looking for from the horse in those sessions is how is the horse responding to the client as they're going through this. And so especially for our veterans with post-traumatic stress, this can be really helpful for them in working with the horse to know how they're doing. Are they actually calming themselves down? What more is it going to take to calm themselves down? And it encourages the client's somatic awareness. So awareness of their body, where are they carrying tension? How fast or slow are they breathing? And we also use it to provide psychoeducation to our clients from a brain-based perspective and understanding why they might react to something the way they would. And so helping them understand the role of stress hormones and oxytocin, the fight or flight response, that sort of thing. So Summer, this is an adult female. She is the spouse of a veteran who requires a full-time, round-the-clock caregiver. And she herself also has a history of significant childhood trauma of every variety. And so when she first started coming to see me, she would actually present very regressed. You know, if you took her out of the adult body, she would look like she was about 8 years old, the way that she would talk and the way that she would interact. She would walk up to a horse, the horse would walk away. She would immediately curl up and say the horse didn't like her. The horse didn't like her just like everybody else doesn't like her. And she would talk about, as we started to regress, how she felt so tense all the time, how she felt so on edge and so stressed. And through the process of working with Summer, she was able to start to relax. And so she, just by having Summer there, just by petting Summer, it calms her down. And in the beginning, we did some structured work around that, where all I did was ask her to notice how fast or slow she was petting Summer, because she was so detached from herself, she wasn't even aware of that. And she'd try to slow her petting down, slow her system down. Got to the point where she was starting to be able to talk about the trauma. She said in previous talk therapy, it felt like she would just up and up and up in talk therapy because there wasn't any way to come back down. But with Summer there, she feels grounded. And when she starts to feel overwhelmed, she can redirect her focus to Summer and then bring it back to the therapy. And you can see the history of suicide on there. She actually told me that Summer saved her life because she was fully intent on following through before she started coming to see us. The spiritual domain. So this emphasizes the role of biophilia. So that is, in a nutshell, humans' innate attraction to nature and just the benefits for us of being around nature. So, there's research that having a green plant in a hospital room can improve outcomes. Even better if somebody who's recovering in a hospital can have a window to see outside. And so just the fact that we're out in nature, that we have a stock tank, that there's water that clients can look at, it's just very soothing and relaxing. It also recognizes the client's unique spiritual or beliefs or faith-based system. So we don't practice any sort of faith-based counseling, but we integrate whatever faith-based system or spiritual beliefs that the client has coming into the session. It acknowledges those things that we can't readily explain that happen in session. And so when we're in our mare's pasture and all of a sudden, the client's very distraught, when they're talking about something, the mares all come and surround the client. I can make guesses as a horse person as to why they're doing that, but I can't definitely say the horses did this for this reason. And I certainly can't say why the horses decided that this person is now a member of the herd that's worth protecting in some way. I actually had a couple that I was working with a few years ago, and there was one session that the couple wrote, it's kind of weird that you guys are there because we feel like you're watching us. About 5 minutes later, we had one of the horses in the herd back us up. We could not get close to the couple because he just kept pushing us back further and further away from them. And so I see things like that on a daily basis. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I don't know if I buy that, if that stuff really happens. I don't know if horses do that. But I see it often enough that it's happening. And so the way I explain it is even if we don't have the science to back up why they're doing it, how they understand to respond this way, it is happening. And then finally, it allows the client to make their own meaning and their own interpretation, which we'll talk about with Jack's client. So Jack's client was also a military spouse, also childhood trauma, very timid, just wasn't quite sure about asking the horse to do anything, didn't want to do anything that would risk upsetting the horse or bothering the horse. One day she came out, she was very, very anxious, and this was a big draft horse that she worked with, and he spread his legs like he was going to go to the bathroom, but he didn't. And he just stayed in that position the rest of the session. And as soon as the session was over, or it was approaching time, which I've noticed horses have a timer, and they can tell, he stood back up and went about his business. And it felt like he maybe had tried to make himself lower to the ground, which I would imagine wasn't the most comfortable for him, but it was the only time he saw him do it, and he stayed like that so long as she was there next to him. This client would also talk about that she frequently felt that Jack was telling her things, and in the sense that when she was trying to lead Jack, and Jack being a draft horse was very stubborn, and you try to lead him and be like, yeah, I don't think so. But she started, as she was trying to start to build her confidence, she would say, Jack is giving me this challenge on purpose. He knows that I need to work through this, and he wants me to succeed. Can I say with certainty that Jack wasn't giving her that message? No. Can I say with certainty that it wasn't coming from within herself? No. But the fact is that through this domain, the spiritual domain, we're letting that be up to her. We're not going to tell her yes or no, this horse is communicating something to her when it could be coming from the horse or it could be coming within herself. We can't know that. And really, it's not important what we think we know. It's important what she thinks. All right. Now I'm going to pass it over to Danielle.
Refer to this as we're handing you colored glasses, and so this is a way of doing work with horses in psychotherapy. And so now I get to talk a little bit more about on the ground and what it looks like. And so what do horses have to offer? The horses are really, really great at providing the core conditions that we know in therapy. And so for those of you guys who aren't therapists in the room, there's certain ways of presenting ourselves in the world that allow for clients to feel accepted and welcomed. And what we've seen through therapeutic research is that if we can provide those things for people, then people are allowed to be who they are and work through their problems. And so those core conditions are to provide empathy, so to be able to understand somebody from their perspective, their world, and what they are seeing and experiencing in the world. To provide congruence, and so to allow the person to have ideals and values about the world, and then also behave in the world in a way that is the same, so that they can be congruent with who they see themselves being and how they see themselves being in the world. And then also providing unconditional positive regard. So regardless of what you've done, who you've been, what clothes you're wearing that day, that I'm going to see you as a person and accept you as who you are. The great thing about horses is they are the best at this. And so as people, we come in with our own experiences that tend to shape how we see other people and how we relate to other people. Horses are fantastic at this. So we have so much to learn from them. So they are able to understand each other. They are social animals. That's how they survive. And because of that, they seem to be aware of other people and understanding people way faster and way sooner than we are, even as humans. They're very congruent. They can't lie. They have no pretenses. They aren't manipulative. They're going to tell you what it is they need, how they need it, and when they need it. And they're going to tell you what they think of you, straight up, completely honest. And they're also really great at providing that unconditional positive regard. They don't care that you shot up heroin 2 weeks before. They see you as who you are in that moment and are going to relate to you in that present. And so they're not going to bring in their previous conceptions. And they're also able to relate to you on that person level. So they're not necessarily going to be listening to just the words coming out of your mouth, what color clothes you're wearing, but they're going to be able to relate to you for who you are. Feedback and responses to clients' internal and external experiences. So this goes back to that social piece. Horses survive in the herd. Reading other horses' behaviors and interactions tells them whether or not they're safe. Reading other animals. Is that lion going to eat me? Is this plastic bag something that can kill me? Their ability to read others and read the environment allows for them to survive. And because of that, they're very quickly able to read clients' internal and external responses. So if a client walks in My teenage boys do this pretty infamously. They puff their chest out and they walk up to a horse, and their body language is communicating that they're going to be the boss that day and they have something to say. So externally, they're walking up, and horses are able to read that and say, okay, you have to figure out how to relate to us in our hierarchy. And they're going to give that feedback to those clients that maybe they don't like to be bossed around. Maybe they don't appreciate the fact that that client's walking in like they're ready to pick a fight. But then also they're able to read the internal experiences. And so I like to put things in the sense that we tend to have a scale. And so like feeling nervous or anxious. Up here, I am a little bit nervous. I'm speaking in front of a crowd, people I don't know, that kind of thing. However, on the outside, you guys might not be able to read that yet at this point. And so internally, there's some nervousness going on. Horses are able to pick up on that internal experience way sooner than we are. So they might not be able to pick up somebody's, anxiety or if they've experienced PTSD when they're being triggered when it's attitude while it's still at that internal level. Whereas people, and even as ourselves, we're not able to pick up on that until we're at like a 6. So they're able to give us feedback on that information way sooner. They're a model for healthy relationships. Horses are able to get their needs met. They're able to say, I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to feel like I belong in the herd and I have some safety, and they're able to healthily relate to each other to have their needs met. We as people aren't always great at that. I think of moms, how they are readily often willing to give up their meals, willing to give up sleeping in order to take care of their children. And because of that, we often get into this cycle of we're not taking care of ourselves, so then we are depleted and not able to take care of others. And we model those relationship habits all the time. Horses don't do that, and so it's oftentimes a very grounding point for people to come back to, oh, this is the way to healthily operate in the world, that I can take care of myself and others, and here's how I can be in the world. Nonverbal communication and touch. So as a person, it would not be okay for me to walk up to my client and give them a big hug, especially if they're like another adult man. That's not something in our society that would be appropriate. Or even for kids, as nurturing as I am as a person, it's not always appropriate. I don't know that kids' experiences. And also, as a professional, that's not my job to relate to them in that way. We live in a society where we're very aware of the fact that people have used touch in a way that could hurt kids, or have used touch in a way to hurt other people. And because of that, as a professional, it's not my place to use that touch. But what we know is that touch is so healthy. If you can give someone a hug 5 times a day as a person, you are more likely to not get cancer and not have a heart attack. It is healthy for your body to have physical interactions and physical touch. Now, we bring in a horse. They can hug that horse. They can pet that horse. They can lay on that horse. They can kiss on their horse. They can interact physically with their horses in pretty much as many ways as they would like. And it allows for that process and that healing process to take place in a professional manner that is healthy and therapeutic. And then opportunities to practice these skills. And so maybe I've got a teenage client who is constantly arguing with their parents, and they're constantly, once they get frustrated, they blow up, storm out of the room. Well, maybe they're working with their horse and they've gotten to a place where they're frustrated. They could storm out of the pasture, but this also provides them an opportunity to practice working through that frustration and to practice and get feedback from that horse on how to communicate effectively. And because of that practice, they're then able to go home and practice, do what they've practiced now with their parents or their siblings or their teachers and classmates. And so we provide that in-life experience, which gives them some practice, which isn't always available when the horses aren't around. So REPC in practice, so when we're on the ground and actually doing things. The primary belief, we think that clients are the experts in their world and that they are going to try to move towards being healthy and being whole. And we think that when clients are coming to us, that they've had some things that have happened or are having some experiences that are preventing them from getting to that healthiness. As people, we tend to, kind of like the horses, we tend to know that there's certain things that are healthier for us and certain things that are not. In general, we like the healthier things and how they feel. And so we're going to allow our clients to move towards that growth and healing. We believe that the mechanism of change is the relationship. This is not just something that we believe because it's warm and fuzzy, but there is a lot of research out there that shows that the thing that is most effective and most determinant of whether or not clients will get better and whether clients will succeed at their therapy goals is the relationship component. It doesn't matter if you are person-centered, if you're behavioral therapy. It doesn't matter if you're in an office or you're on the moon. It doesn't matter if you have the coolest, latest gadgets or you're sitting on the floor with a blanket. The most important thing is how you relate to those clients. And with the horses, we've been able to bring that piece in and allowed for them to relate to their horses as well. The therapist and client process issues as they arrive in the here and now. So I kind of just talked through that example of the client gets frustrated and they're able to work through it in that moment with their horse, and then they're able to generalize it. And then we're able to generalize it. So focus and enlarge the meaning outside of session. So I get into a fight with my horse. I don't always automatically think of the fight that I just had with my husband. I don't always automatically think of the argument that I just had with my mom and how that's affecting me. However, in general, we want to facilitate that. Maybe the way that you're relating with those horses is the way that you relate with other people too. And if you have the power to change your relationship with the horse, you have the power to change the way that you relate with other people too. You have the power to change how you feel in the world. And so we want to be able to generalize it outside of session as well, because the clients aren't living in a barn 24/7. And so we want them to be able to use those skills in other areas in their life. The horses are seen as sentient and self-directed. So that just means that they're beings and they can make their own decisions, and we want to respect that. And so though we do train them for safety purposes, we want them to be able to have a say in a session, be seen as a being, and also have value in that. So it matters to us if that horse is stressed out. It matters to us if we're going to put them in a dilemma that could hurt them. It matters to us when they're giving us feedback that they don't like something. And so a lot of times as equine specialists, giving the horse that ability to exist and have value and have a say in things. Equines, because we believe that they have value and that they are thinking beings, we often allow them to interact and put in their value freely and organically. And so a lot of times this means if the horse doesn't like something, allowing them to walk away and move 10 feet back. Whereas if we were in a training situation or we were working on riding them, that may not be something that we automatically do. But in the process of this model, we want to allow them to give us that feedback. And oftentimes, what the amazing thing is, because those horses are so good at those relational components that we just talked about, because they're so much better than us at those things, when we allow the horses to have their say and we allow the horses to respond freely, we find that the therapy happens faster and more effectively. And so when we kind of get ourselves out of the way as the people and we allow the horses to do their innate thing, we see it happen faster. The client's process is experiential and discovery-based. So I'm not going to come in teaching my clients what to do, and I'm not going to come in rescuing my clients from things. The example that we like to give a lot of times is opening gates. At the facility we're at, every single one of our gates has a different kind of clip or lock on it. It's just kind of the way things worked out. And we don't tell our clients how to open the gate. Something that doesn't seem like necessarily the biggest challenge, but a lot of our clients get to the gate and then they kind of deer in headlight us. And they wonder what they're going to do. And we just tell them, you can decide what you want to do. And so then they're able to go through this experiential process of discovering how to open the gate. Do I want to walk in and go see the horses? When do I want to do that? And so this is really important because when you get out in the real world, deciding what you want to do, who you want to relate to, what you want to eat for lunch that day. A lot of times people, especially as children, have all of those decisions made for them. And so to go through the process of experiencing, making their own decisions and experiencing, interacting in the world, they are able to take those skills and use them when they're in their life. And the nature of treatment is tailored based on the unique needs of the clients. And so this is not something that is a magic wand. We're not going to be able to just wave it and everything to be better. And so we have to consider the person who's walking in and seeing us. So our veterans who walk in, their work with the horses look a lot different than my teenagers who come in, or even my young children who come in. And I'm not going to treat them the same way. I'm not going to do the same activities with them, and I'm not going to relate to them the same way. And so we're going to consider that thing. And then also you as a person, you as an equine specialist, you as a counselor, how you operate in the world is going to be different than how I operate in the world, which is really important because if you're not comfortable in what you're doing and how you're doing it, it's going to affect how your clients experience things. And so in general, I think kind of a great example of this is that I, as a person, am very nurturing and very, and so I like to take care of other people. And so I will get worried about my kids way sooner than some other therapist will. And so I start to freak out internally. Oh my goodness, is this going to hurt them? They fell down. Their knees hurt. I need to check on them. I need to take care of them. That's about me as a person. And because of that, when I'm in session, I tell my kids that. And so I say, I'm really worried right now because I want to care about you. Now, other people, that's not a necessary thing for them. And so they're able to allow the kids to run around a little bit more, and they're able to, experience the world with their kids. And so knowing what works for you as well and knowing what you're bringing in is going to make a difference. And then using your clinical judgment. So most importantly, you guys as therapists have been trained, and you guys as equine specialists have been trained. So you have the ability to kind of, when you get into those gray areas, make judgment calls. Is it going to be safe for this person to walk around the back of the horse? So in general, that as a horse person rule, the back of the horse is kind of a dangerous area. However, if a horse is perfectly comfortable with you walking behind them in a stall, is this client able to do that? Is it going to be safe for them? You, as the equine specialist, get to use your judgment to make that call. You, as the counselor, get to use your judgment to decide where that person is at and whether or not that's going to be safe. And that's something that you have to do all the time. And so that's also why it's really important to be under supervision and collaborating with other people, is so that you can be talking about that judgment. And if that was a good call or a bad call, how we can be safe or how we can get that better. We oftentimes focus on the unmounted work to allow the horses to do their thing a little bit more. If a horse decides to leave a riding session, it's going to be a lot more dangerous with a person on their back than if a horse decides to leave a groundwork session. And so if they decide that they're frustrated with the way the client's interacting with you, it's a lot more dangerous when I'm on their back. And so because of safety concerns, we do a lot of things from the ground first before we integrate the riding part. In very special cases, we've permitted riding. An example of that is we had an adolescent come in, and he was so depressed and so despondent that relating to the horse was almost impossible for him because he was so detached from the world and so disinterested in everything that he couldn't get himself to relate to us or the horses, regardless of the prompting. And so because of that, we did engage in riding first because the physical movement and the process of getting on engaged his brain and his body, which then allowed for him to start engaging in the connection and the emotional piece. And then we came back to the groundwork. Those are very special cases that we make those exceptions for because of safety purposes, and allowing the horses to have their organic say a little bit more. It's relationship focused, not activity focused. Hallie touched on that a little bit earlier. We're not going to move them from point A to point B unless there's a component or a reason behind it. They can practice moving basketballs from point A to point B. They can practice, and so in general, it's not necessarily about what you're doing, but why you're doing it. What is the intention behind it, and are you still respecting that horse as a being? And then interpreting responses. This is once again allowing clients the freedom to kind of express themselves and how they relate in the world, but also not rescuing them, allowing them to be self-directed. And so the thing that I like to point out a lot is that we don't always interpret the horses for a client. Almost every single one of us have seen a horse fall asleep and how they cock a hip and put a foot up. A lot of clients when they walk in say, oh my goodness, that horse is going to kick me, I'm going to die, this is the dangerous situation, and then they're like out. And for us, as horse people, we know, oh, that horse is just taking a nap. But the client didn't read the whole horse, they just saw their hoof, we're done. And so if they're willing to do that in the relationship with their horse or out there in that pasture, how often are they maybe doing that in their relationships in the rest of the world? How often are they making interpretations based on one tiny fact instead of the whole picture? And so what we want to do is not go in and fix it for them. No, that horse isn't going to kick you. It's okay, they're safe, which is an immediate reaction for us. We want to allow them to say, okay, what did you see? How did you come up with that interpretation? Now, how about we look at the rest of the horse? What are you reading? To help them learn how to read the whole situation, to help them learn. Because I'm not going to follow my clients everywhere and say, okay, no. That's not what's really happening. And so what I want to do is allow for those clients to build those skills to do that themselves. So that when they're outside of the session, they can generalize. And then safety limits. So we talked about that. Are they allowed to walk behind the back of the horse? You need to make that decision. You need to be able to bring that safety in. And also to provide physical and emotional safeties. So I have a particular client, female veteran, experienced sexual trauma, and also some childhood trauma. And because of that, her ability to keep herself safe out with the horses was limited, not because she wasn't physically capable of it, but because emotionally using force was something that was really intimidating because it reminded her of her abuse. And so we were out in the pasture, and she was working with one of the mid-level horses, and one of the more dominant horses came to go move her horse off. Now, that mid-level horse did what he was supposed to do and started to move out of the way, but my client, because of all of the interactions, froze. It caused a trigger for her, and she froze. That was her response to that. Now, because of that, as the equine specialist, I had to read that situation and realize that she emotionally wasn't in a safe place right now, but she physically also, because she wasn't going to be in a safe place, because she wasn't going to be able to stop that mid-level horse from moving into her, or she wasn't going to be able to tell that mid-level horse to move around her and not over the top of her. And because of that, we, as the professionals in the room, need to be able to make those decisions and read those calls and then provide that safety. If our client is physically hurt or emotionally hurt while they're in the room with us, we're not being therapeutic, and it also is going to damage any future therapy that we're able to do with them. And so making that the most important thing so that we can have that trusting therapeutic relationship. Formats of how we do it. We provide a lot of individual counseling. That's one of the more intense ways. And so if a client is working on themselves first, that individual format. We do groups. We see two different type of groups. One that is more relational-based, process-based, working on specific things. And then the second is team-building exercises, workshops for businesses. That is a little bit more activity-based. And the goals are a little bit less relational with the horses and maybe more relational with the group themselves that are there. And so we still use the horses in a relational way, but those formats look completely different, and how we interact with the horses. And the activities look completely different and why we're doing it. Once again, that's that intentions. Why are you doing what you're doing, and how are you going to give the horses a voice? Family and couples counseling, they are different, but very principally they are very similar in the work that we do. Once again, it is about the unit as a whole. And so if you have someone who individually is coming in and it is about that one person, individual counseling is going to be most important. If it's how they're functioning together as a unit, then that group counseling or that or families therapy or that couples counseling is important. An example of couple counseling that I like to kind of talk about is there's a military couple, super high conflict, very volatile. When they did get in conflict, it was really not pretty. They had done couples therapy previously, but a lot of times once they got into that heightened state of, I'm angry, we're in conflict. It was so volatile that they weren't able to be productive anymore. Having the horses, what they ended up doing is they chose separate horses that they then would come into session with. And the horses became their feedback of how they were doing as a couple, of when they got into that volatile state. And so the husband's horse, we knew that when he came, when the horse would be willing to stand with him and not try to walk away and not try to leave the session, that they were in a safe enough space and they were not volatile to where they could actually begin working on things. And when that horse decided, I'm out and bailing, we realized that we were getting into that volatile place and that the work needed to stop until we were coming back down. Deciding what's going to be safest for what you're doing. We oftentimes are in the pasture because it gives us more freedom and more room for our clients to move. But depending on the activities and what we're doing, we'll move those areas. Certain activities that we do aren't safe in a pasture. And so as an equine specialist, maybe it's too much room and I can't actually keep up with the safety because I can't run 400 feet across a pasture in 30 seconds. And so some of those things then I would move into an arena or a round pen, depending on your clients. Maybe if your client is working with a horse and that horse wants to be able to bail from that session, maybe a round pen's not enough room for them to bail. And so making that decision and then changing accordingly to those different areas. Also, because we're working with horses and we're outside a lot, weather concerns come up that will also determine those working areas and considering that. Yes, we have a question in the back. Yeah, that's a great question. And so in the barn, we've done all sorts of things in the barn. A lot of that relationship building and relationship experience happens in the barn. Some of the activities that we do for physical regulation, the physiological domain of the client recognizing if they're breathing quickly, if they're working on grooming, we can do that in the barn. Even working on empowerment pieces. So I have an adolescent who's really anxious, and so his way of feeling empowered is working with his horse and relating to his horse to ask his horse to take a step or to back up or to move over in the stall to where he can have room to walk from side to side. And so there's lots of different things that you can be doing in the barn that is using all of those areas. It's just a little bit, can be limiting. For the horses to respond more organically. So there's more constraints there. Yes?
Quick question about HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
If, say you're working outside of a center,
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about that to secure the HIPAA environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had lots of conversations with staff at the barns, and so they do... And we also cover that in our confidentiality paperwork with our clients. And so where we are, we practice alongside, there's one of our pastures lined up on the road, which means that we're able to be seen in the pasture. It's a backcountry road, so it's not a high traffic area all the time, but we bring awareness to our clients that there's going to be times where other people that we are visually either breaking that confidentiality or audibly breaking that confidentiality. Being in the barn is another one of those challenge areas because if other individuals are in the barn, they are in earshot and are able to overhear that a little bit more. We verbally express that to our clients, and we will express that, but we've also talked with our staff to have them work with us as well, that if they overhear anything, it is confidential information, and we ask them to then follow those confidential practices.
So in your releases,
Mm-hmm.
that's just something addressed between the client and you guys?
Yes, we do cover that.
We
Mhm.
also, we'll save the rest of the questions if that's okay, but we also have all the staff sign a business associate agreement, which for those of you that don't know, that's a HIPAA confidentiality document for staff and employees. So I think we've got one last slide.
And then different activities. This is going to be those on-the-ground activities. We talked a little bit through them. I'm going to go briefly through this since we are at the end of our time. The relationship building activities, going up and meeting the horses, grooming on the horses, observing the herd and how they relate to each other, and discussing that. Nurturing activities, that is a lot of that physical touch and hugging on the horse, grooming the horse, but also even I think of our kiddos, a lot of times once they have related to the horses and they feel like they're getting a lot out of the relationship with the horses, they want to clean the barn. They want to muck stalls. They want to be able to give give back to their horses. And we allow for them to be able to do that in their relationships. Self-regulation and mindfulness, that's going to be the physiological piece of being aware of how they're feeling and trying to regulate that purpose. So when I'm anxious, my heart rate goes through the roof, and I carry my tension between my shoulders. Becoming aware of that and then doing exercises, whether breathing or grooming, to help regulate that process. And then creativity and free expression. The one that I automatically think of is that we allow for clients to paint the horses with non-toxic safe paint. So it gives them the ability to express something that maybe they're not able to put verbally. Or even creating where they're going to walk, a trail, a pattern that they're going to move their horse through. Those sorts of things allows clients to just self-direct and then express themselves accordingly. Let's stay in touch. So if you guys have any more questions and want to be in contact with us, or you guys would like to get the PowerPoint emailed to you,